Russell Stannard is the founder of teachertrainingvideos.com and a winner of 4 awards in educational technology. He's ranked as no less than one of the top 20 educational technologists by Mimeo. He puts out a weekly newsletter that has more than 25,000 subscribers and 300,000 yearly visitors to his website, and for a reason. Russell specializes in training in a range of educational online tools and is incredibly generous in uploading free videos weekly on YouTube that make these tools accessible. I know because every time I'm obligated to use a new software or app, I search Russell's site and I'm blessed with digital understanding within minutes. Stress goes down, production goes up. I think you're going to be fascinated by Russell's understanding of the dual perspectives of technology, the joys that can come from its use if we're responsible and use it to match our teaching method, and the detrimental effects it can have if valuable collaborative time for our students in the classroom is sublimated by its use. Russell speaks passionately about how technology has helped him to learn languages in more expansive and diverse ways, and how ideally it can be used in the home as just another way of learning more about the culture of whatever language we're studying. You can find more conversations about a myriad of subjects on education at Doodles with Donna, and free activities that can augment whatever methodology you might be using at home or in the classroom at scaffoldingmagic.com. Right now, put on your seatbelts because we're on a ride down the digital highway with Russell Stannard. Russell, welcome. So, Russell, tell me about your educational background, because I know that you didn't become the educational digital guru intentionally. You kind of fell into that. So can you tell us about it?
Actually, no, I did do it intentionally, not to become a guru, but I did actually intentionally decide to study technology. But what happened was that, I had a background in ELT. I was working in Spain, and I was doing a little bit of publishing. I was writing photocopyable materials, and I was speaking a lot to the publishing companies. And I knew that there was a lot of kind of concern around what was technology going to do, where is it going to go, how is it going to influence their business. And I just saw that there was an opportunity for me. And I thought, well, if I could connect sort of my pedagogic background in ELT with knowledge of technology, that I would be in a good situation. So I left where I worked, which was the International House in Seville. I was the director of studies there. I took a year out originally, and I went back to England and I did a master's degree in multimedia technology, or multimedia in education. And it included a bit of programming and stuff. So, I mean, I'm not a natural with technology at all. I really had to start kind of confront it, but I thought, no, I'm this is going to be really interesting. And then what happened was the university where I did my master's degree, they said to us, well, would you like to stay at the university and become a teacher trainer? So then I took up a post at the university. So I didn't return to Spain, but instead I decided to stay in the UK. So it was on purpose. But what I would say is that I'm not a natural with technology. It's not as if I have played computer games or anything like that. I just simply learned it because I saw that there was an opportunity, and I knew that it would benefit me in terms of what I wanted to try to do with my students. There were lots of things about what technology was offering me that I thought, yeah, I've always wanted to do that with my students, get them speaking, get them to do more studying at home. So that was particularly why I was interested in technology.
All right. So you know, as well as I do, that because of the pandemic, teachers were really pushed into using technology, whereas before they could avoid it much more successfully. But even 3 years later, there are so many teachers who are resistant to using technology because it's not intuitive for them.
No.
So
definitely.
What would you tell them?
Well, I'd agree with them. I mean, I'd agree it's not intuitive. I mean, I think for the majority of people, there are obviously certain people that are really into technology, and I've got some friends who are amazing with it and they pick up things very quickly, rather like there are people that are very good at learning languages. I'm not one of those either. But no, so I do agree that, it isn't something that's intuitive. It's not, but there are things about what technology can do that really can make our lessons much more engaging and much more interesting.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
Well, I mean, I think certainly in terms of the big thing that I'm interested in, what we call informal learning. In other words, opening up the well that is now on offer in terms of learning outside the classroom. If we can facilitate our students and help them to understand about things like podcasts, maybe ChatGPT, for example, working with YouTube, having knowledge of how YouTube works, how you can find transcripts, having knowledge, say, for example, of things like Google Translate or other translation tools. Having this kind of knowledge would really help our students to be able to study on their own. But a lot of them need support. How do you search for podcasts? Where are the right podcasts, the right level? How do you use YouTube more effectively to search for the right types of videos, to search for videos that have got subtitles, to use the subtitles? Many of these things students don't know. So we have got an opportunity as teachers to learn these things. We don't have to become gurus. I'm definitely not a guru anyway, but we certainly don't need to be. We just need to build up a knowledge of some key things that could really encourage our students to make better use of the time that they've got outside of the classroom, which is what I do a lot in Polish. I really am amazed, apart from my lessons with my teacher, just how much I can now learn on my own. In contrast, say, for example, to when I was studying Spanish or French, now in the 21st century, there are so many learning opportunities outside of the classroom. It's absolutely amazing.
All right, so I'm going to make sure that everyone knows where to find you. And you're incredibly generous about explaining different ways to use, for instance, subtitles or YouTube or different functions that you might not be aware of if someone like you didn't give you these tips. I'm wondering, however, what percentage do you think that teachers ought to be thinking about using technology in the classroom? Let's focus on that first.
I mean, to be honest with you, what you really need is a well-trained teacher. That's the most important thing. A teacher that's really got a strong pedagogy, understands really how languages, or what we know about language learning. We know that language learning is about engagement, using the language, not learning big lists of verbs or big lists of words, but rather using the language, not necessarily always speaking, but also reading, listening, getting lots of exposure to the language. So for me, really, when I'm in the classroom, my pedagogy is still based on that, what I understand about how we learn a language. Now, if I can see that technology can facilitate that at some points, perhaps for reasons of motivation, perhaps simply because of the type of material that we can make available to the students, so you might introduce YouTube videos into the lesson to make it more interesting. But I don't think you necessarily need to feel forced to bring that much technology into the class, because if you've got your students working well together in pairs, in groups, moving around, doing activities, and the lessons are really engaging, you don't really need to be bringing a lot of technology in. I think there are certain points when technology can add something to the class. Sometimes, playing a game, a Kahoot, a quizzes game, a Socrative game, that can be fun. That can break up a lesson sometimes. I think there are real moments. Obviously, YouTube is great because it sets context to listening activities. So I can see a lot of use of YouTube in the class. And there are certain moments when you might want to do collaborative activities that include a Google Doc or a Padlet, etc. But predominantly, you don't need technology in a class. Only 3.5, 4 years ago, I went to, I'm in Poland now, but went to Krakow and I studied Polish in a school in Krakow. The teacher hardly used any technology in the class. We did watch some videos, but we were playing games and working in pairs and working in groups. The lessons were fantastic. And I never missed the technology. I think we have to be very careful about using technology in the classroom. I think it can sometimes get in the way. So I do see some value in it, but maybe not as much as other educational technologies. My interest is more outside of the class.
It's using technology outside of the classroom. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, because as you're saying, and I completely agree with you, it all depends on the method. It all depends on the skills of the teacher. So if you're using technology as a tool and a valuable tool, then it's valuable. But is using technology just so that
you have more free time, or because you think that your students are going to learn better looking at a video instead of working together in a group, then it might be an erroneous use of technology. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think also one of the things that a lot of teachers forget is, what have you taken out of your lesson? So, you introduce a technology into the class, right? But what is it that you've taken out? Maybe you've taken out a really interesting pair work activity or a group work activity, or just simply it's impacting on the dynamics of your lesson. Technology does tend to slow a lesson down. So sometimes when I've observed classes and the teacher's got a really nice dynamic going and there's a certain pace to the lesson, and then suddenly it comes to the tech bit, and then, we have to log on and there's problems, and then suddenly the pace of the lesson changes. So you have to be really careful. I think there's a tendency for us to overlook these things. But when you observe lessons, you see those things happening, and then you think to yourself, oh, should he really have, or should she have really introduced the technology at that part? The lesson was going really well. Maybe they could have done something else. So I'm not trying to dismiss technology outright and say don't use it in the classroom. It's definitely got value, but you do need to think it through very carefully. And it's not only about, well, what is that technology going to contribute to your lesson, but it's also about what are you taking out of the class. For example, if you see sometimes lessons where the teacher's using one technology after the other in the class, you often see that there's very little interaction between the students, or there's a problem with the dynamics because there's these kind of, right, we're moving from one technology to another technology, and sometimes there's a lack of focus as well in the lesson because it almost feels like a media studies class and not a language learning class. So there are lots of things to think about when we're introducing technology into the class. At the end of the day, a well-trained teacher focusing on what they want to achieve in the class in terms of listening, developing students' listening skills, speaking skills, grammar, vocabulary, may or may not need to use technology to deliver an effective class.
Okay. And again, I completely agree with you, because I have this great honor of being able to go into the classroom, and I'll see in preschool where a teacher who has 30 minutes with her students will use those 30 minutes to show 8 or 9 videos. And I think it is complete misuse of the time. And she'll say, but they like the cartoon characters and they love the songs. And I'll say, yes, I completely agree with you, but they don't need to be sitting in front of the screen. You can actually just have the audio on for a lot of that if you're not comfortable singing or doing whatever the narration is in the video. So you said that you're not so intuitive with technology and that you had to really focus on it, but you are an intuitive educator. And you can see that over and over again in your videos. Your videos always show ways for the teacher to relate to the student. So you'll use Snagit or you use Camtasia to show teachers how they can use the document they've given the students and how they can actually make a video of feedback. That's just one example of your hundreds of examples at your website. So I'm wondering if you have a favorite technology, or if, I guess the better question is, am I correct in saying that most of your focus is helping the teacher relate to the students? And that's what you use technology for?
I'm not sure. Really, what I'm always thinking about is how you learn a language. I'm just obsessed with it. I'm just obsessed with how we learn, basically. The roots of that really started when I worked at International House in Seville, and a particular friend of mine, Mike Carter, who I'm still in contact with. In fact, we still work together. We just spent hours and hours and hours talking about learning. And I did at that time read a lot, in terms of sort of books about pedagogy and about thinking about learning, how learning takes place, how do we process and retain the knowledge. I was interested myself in learning languages. And so when I'm looking at technologies, I'm always looking at it from that perspective. I'm always looking at technology and think, okay, what impact could this have on the delivery of the class, in terms of what it could do for the teacher and in terms of achieving their goals. So, if I was thinking about my lessons and I've got certain goals that I want to achieve, I want to get my students to be exposed to a lot of language. I want to make sure that they use a lot of language. I want to make sure that the homework that they get is interesting. I want to offer them opportunities for speaking. And so I'll look at technology and say to myself, well, does that technology help with any of those things? And if it does, then I'm interested in it. If I can see a real link between what I want to achieve. And that's why I'm always saying, you do need as a teacher to have a strong pedagogy. If you've got it really clear in your mind what you want to achieve with your students and you want your students to achieve, then you're able to select when you think a technology is going to be effective, because it's always linked back to those principles that you've got in place. one of the things about the principles for me, you know, this whole process of always thinking about learning or thinking about learning is that I always learn a language myself. So alongside the fact that I've been a language teacher, you know, since 1987, I've always been learning a language. I've never, ever stopped in that whole time, you know, whether it be Spanish, and it was French, then it was a little bit of Chinese, and now it's Polish. So I've just been always learning a language. And I think that also helps because as I use, you know, I'm often using these technologies as a language learner. And then I'm thinking, right, is this working? Is this helpful? Right, brilliant, it is. I'm going to show this to the teachers. So pedagogy is absolutely vital in terms of making the right choices about when technologies are going to be useful in teaching and learning.
So again, using technology as a tool. And I will say that I do believe that you're very intuitive and that you use technology. And they often say that poets don't really know what their poetry is about until someone else reads it and tells them what it's about. Or you could say a book is the same. And I would say that I'm able to step back and see what you're doing. And from my perspective is you're always connecting the teacher to the student. And yes, it's to help them learn the language, but I would say it's to form a collaboration, to use the technology in forming collaborations. And in your mind, it's forming a collaboration to learn language the best possible, most effective way. But I would say that you use technology in a very humane way. And that's why I really appreciate your videos and why they're so accessible and why they're easy to listen to and why in the end, they're very valuable. So I also wanted to make a point because you say you learn languages and there's a really important distinction between learning and acquiring a language. Mm-hmm. And acquiring is what your daughter is doing now. She's learning Polish and English organically because you speak English to her and she hears Polish all around her, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're also saying that you learned French, you learned Spanish, Chinese, and now Poland. And so you're really focused on the most effective way to learn, which is a much more deliberate way of organizing information in your brain, correct?
Yeah, but that's quite interesting because we were talking a little bit about informal learning and see there are so many more opportunities to expose yourself to language, to get access to that language. Because I think when you learn a language, you know, you actually decide to learn a language. There's still quite a lot of organic learning that goes on in that process. So there is a very direct part of language learning where you're sitting down and working it out and understanding vocabulary and understanding grammar and building it together. But there's also another part that's very, you know, I think learning is very much what we would call a bottom up and a top down approach. So the bottom up part is sort of breaking it down into the segments and what I call number crunching. And there's definitely a need to do that because sometimes you just need to clarify things and develop patterns. And I guess that's where grammar comes in, the sort of word building. But then another part of language learning is just being exposed to lots of language, probably a bit like Krashen says, slightly above your level. And that is almost the process that goes on there is very sort of, it's not passive, but it certainly is sort of accidental. You simply know the more that you expose yourself to language and you put yourself in situations where you're hearing the language and you're listening to what you know, you're making an active attempt to listen to it and to understand it. The more you do that, the better you become. You improve. So for me, there's always two processes. And I think that's one of the interesting things about technology. It's just amazing. You know, I mean, I was doing it this morning, Donna. You know, I woke up this morning and I studied and I listened to an interview about a Polish woman who's living in Egypt. Now, and it was an interview in Polish about her life there. Now, I didn't understand everything, but I saw this as a top-down lesson where I was simply exposing myself to some listening material that was interesting because it was a very interesting subject for me. And, you know, that's also part of the language learning process. It requires both.
Which brings up a really important topic. In Spain, you were working in the International House, right?
Yeah.
How much authentic material did you use when you were working there? And how much do you think is appropriate to use?
I'm not a massive, I'm not quite sure about this word authentic, in my opinion. In other words, sometimes, you know, specific dialogues that have been created in a studio that have sort of native-like, or they can be really useful. I think so. I think it just really depends on what you're doing. I do like exposing myself to real examples of Polish people speaking in Polish, and that's really useful because I'm living in Poland. But I think we also have to keep in mind these days that a lot of people are going to be listening to other people speaking English who are not necessarily native speakers. So my kind of feeling about authentic English is a bit nebulous. I'm not necessarily one that feels that if I come across a course book and I know that the dialect's been written, but it obviously written to try and sound as natural as possible, and it's been recorded by two actors, whether or not that's counterproductive or not, I'm not really sure. I don't think it is. So I'm quite happy to deal with both. And so I will often cross over. I like using a course book. I use a course book in Polish. I know that's got lots of non-authentic, in a way, dialogues in it, but I still find them very useful, particularly for language study. But then sometimes, because particularly I'm living in Poland, I do make the effort to try and listen to actual native speakers speaking Polish, because obviously that's going to be really important for me, because that's what I'm exposed to here in Poland. But we do have to think very carefully about our students, because a lot of them are not going to live in England or in America, but what they are going to do is speak to other people in English who are non-natives. So we have to be aware that maybe this kind of authentic English, in my opinion, authentic English, it's not maybe as important as we thought it was, or maybe that's my opinion anyway.
You have this arc of living. You grew up in the UK.
Yeah.
You worked in Spain. You're living in Poland now. Did you live in China?
No, but I spent a lot of time traveling there, and hence the reason I did 1 year of Chinese at school.
So my question is, do you have a perspective on the differences between how education is viewed in these four countries and how technology is accepted in those four countries?
Really interesting question. And it's done a lot of work in China, and you actually see quite a lot of use of technology in China, but you see it used in a very different way, because the learning, the kind of perception is a sort of top-down approach where the teacher is delivering the information to the students, and the students sort of are meant to sort of take on board the information and maybe work with it a little bit to make sure that they understood what the teacher have said, but not really to process and work and sort of develop necessarily their critical thinking. You see that less you see a lot more of a top-down approach to teaching and learning in China. And so technology is used in the same way. So you'll often see content that's put onto a course in Moodle or something, and it's very, very heavy with content and that the students have to work on, rather than them collaborating together and sharing ideas. So there's a different approach. So you see use of technology, but in a very different way.
Did you work in the schools enough to answer the following question? You can just say yes or no. I was just speaking yesterday with a teacher who worked in China for a long time, and she said one of the big differences between the students in China and the students in her country, which in this case is Armenia, is that the students in China work incessantly, but to please their teacher and to please the parents. And that's not true in other cultures. Did you experience that?
Well, I mean, I would agree with that. I went to China 30 times. I never taught. I observed quite a few classes. I had lots of experience of meeting teachers over the whole of all of China. And I would certainly say that that's very much part of the kind of culture. So there's enormous pressure from the parents as well to achieve. Education is very, very important. It's important everywhere, but simply it's very held, in high esteem. And, there is also, I guess, I've seen classes, though, of course, it's very difficult to tell when you're observing the class because the students behave a lot better, et cetera, et cetera. But, students are generally very well behaved, and they'll be very quiet, and they're often very big classes. I've even seen, for example, 60 students in a class, and the teacher needs a microphone to talk to the students. It does also mean as well in those types of contexts that, sometimes doing pair work and group work can be really difficult. It's not, we sometimes apply our kind of Western philosophy about learning on these contexts that can be really challenging. I've been doing some work, for example, at the moment with groups of schools, including schools in Malawi. And the same thing, the students are sitting down on the floor, and getting them to work in groups is a noisy, though it's a worthwhile experience, it is noisy, and it does require a little bit more organization and thought in terms of how students are going to work together. So, but yes, I would agree with what you've just said about China.
Okay, and of course, we can't make really overarching generalizations because I'm not in every classroom and I don't speak with every teacher, and neither do you. But what I guess I'm wondering is the critical thinking aspect. You're saying that the teacher is very top heavy about the digital information so that there's less collaboration. And I'm wondering if there's less critical thinking, because you know as well as I do that in Europe, what we're trying to do now is include much more critical thinking in all the lessons.
Well, it definitely seems like that. Okay, it definitely seems like that. I mean, it's a very interesting question whether or not Chinese people in the long run, therefore, because of the type of education they receive, end up being less able to do that, though, as a skill. And I'd wonder whether or not, seeing how, when I was out in China, how incredibly fast the country was progressing and developing, and being amazed at some of the students that I've worked with, particularly when I was working at Warwick University. I mean, with some of the students that were coming over, absolutely amazing, really, really able to absorb and take on. So it's quite interesting. We have that kind of philosophy about the way that we think that education, what we want to achieve in the classroom with our students and develop their critical thinking skills. The Chinese have a different way of delivering their teaching and learning. Yeah, I'm wondering whether at the end, whether there is a major difference between the way Chinese students act and the way that students in the West act. I wouldn't really have enough experience, but I'm sometimes amazed at the quality of the students that come out of China, and I've worked with many of them.
Okay, so then can you comment on the differences between your experiences in China and the digital element, and then Spain and the UK and Poland?
Well, as I've said, I think really from the teacher's point of view, it's very much about the way the content is delivered. So what I'm trying to say to you is that though I see clearly a difference in the use of technology, in fact, the whole philosophy around how we learn, I think it's very, very different in China. My experience of China is very much it's a bottom-up process. And it's a process that is where you receive the information from your students and from your teacher, and you kind of regurgitate it and you understand it and you take it on board. And whereas in England, or in the West, what we try to do a lot more is provide students with information and get them to work through it and think about it and discuss it and debate it. And, and so there is, you think we're slightly coming from two different angles. But what surprises me is that my experience, and of course, I really don't know, but my experience of working with students, say, that have come through the university systems, done a master's degree with me at Warwick, or studied with me at Warwick or Westminster University, or in fact now where I do some work at King's College University, I'm always amazed how high, the way that the students are from a Chinese culture, despite the fact that they've not necessarily done a collaborative, critical thinking form of learning. They've learned in a different way. Whether the outcomes are that different, I think that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't know the answer, Donna, to be honest with you, but certainly it always amazes me how high quality many of the students that come out of China are.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a very basic question. I usually like to start with this, but it no matter. How would you define education?
Well, I saw that was a question that you was going to ask me, and I'm really not sure if I know the answer to that, really. I mean, for me, I guess what I'm thinking about a lot when I'm thinking about the word education is sort of self-improvement, improvement, developing skills in the areas that you want to that are going to be useful you in your life, in your own personal life. So you're going to be, I'm not particularly interested in science, for example. It's not something that comes into my world that much. So, it's not an area where I pursue my education and develop my understanding. But for example, other areas, obviously the use of technology, for example, what's going on now in ChatGPT, etc. Yes. So I think a big part of or education for me, and a big part of our job as teachers these days is to try to help our students to become more effective autonomous learners, so that when they go out into the world, because learning is going to take place always now. It's not going to be, it's not like when, say, for example, in the period of my parents, my dad had the same job all his life. He was a musician at night time and a sales rep in the daytime. He never, he only worked for 3 or 4 different companies, and that was it. And I never remember my dad ever studying. He practiced the piano a bit, but even that he didn't do very much. So I think, whereas nowadays we're just continually learning, there's this whole thing about continually, there's a need to continually learn these days, because jobs are changing so much, skills are changing so much, technology is changing so much. Also, simply because the amount of information that's now available to us. So if we do develop that kind of skill and that hunger for learning, then, there is a lot out there that we can learn now and access in many, many different ways. So that's the key part, I think, of our job. So that's the way that I see education. It's about that pursuit of the skills and the knowledge that's going to help you to make your way through your life.
So with the clarity of that answer, then it just proves my case. And when I'm saying that you are an educator and you keep insisting that you like learning languages, but I think that you are pretty much a holistic educator at the foundation. What I'd like then to ask you is, how much do you think that culture is included in learning a language? And how would you say that technology can help or might even harm that process?
So it's often an interesting thing, because because I think it almost links a little bit to motivation. Let's take the example of Poland. Okay, so because I married a Polish woman, so I've got a Polish wife, so I've decided to learn that language. At that particular point, when I made that decision to start to learn Polish, I wasn't necessarily particularly that interested in Polish culture. The interest developed as I started to learn the language, and then I started to learn more about, say, for example, the First World War and the Second World War, and even the period before, Napoleon, etc. I started to understand more about sort of Polish society, the geography of the country, how the history varies depending on the region because of the politics and what's happened. I become very interested, for example, in the communist period, which I'm actually reading a book at the moment about. I also become quite interested in the influence of the Catholic Church in Poland, because it has a particular role here. And I think those things evolved or developed, that interest developed through the fact that I began to learn the language. And I guess what I try to do then as well is do a sort of what I call a double whammy. I'm learning to speak Polish, but I'm also learning about Polish culture at the same time. And which is one of the reasons why I like technology, because it gives me that opportunity to just find material all over the place on all sorts of subjects that I might be interested in, which I can learn in Polish. So in terms of, the role that culture plays in language learning, I think if we're talking about the cultures of the language you're learning, because if you're learning Spanish, then it's, many different cultures. I think that grows often through the language as you learn it, because you suddenly become aware of many things that you perhaps didn't know about a country before. So, but sometimes it does work the other way around. So actually, in the case of French, my thing was I love the sound of the language. I was always kind of interested in French culture. I was, went there and I love the countryside and I love the old villages and I love a lot of the way that people live in France. And so actually my interest in French kind of started with the culture first and then obviously entered into the language. So it can go both ways. How
would you address students who are not naturally curious as you are? Because you're talking about the fact that you love learning. And sometimes it's one point it started because you love the culture. At some point, it was just because you love the language, you love the sound of it, or there was a certain necessity. How do you think that you could recommend teachers use technology? And we're talking about technology so often because you are, in my mind, the technology guru in education, in the educational world. How could teachers use technology to animate, to encourage students to become more involved in their own learning of these languages that they are actually obligated to learn? It's not necessarily their choice.
That's it's a tough one now. I mean, I think one of the things is and it's really hard to bring home, and I'm not even sure whether it's fully the responsibility of just a teacher, it's a bigger responsibility of the whole society as well. It's just to make people, and particularly young people, more aware of what a language can bring to them. I mean, they're incredibly enriching learning language. It opens up another world. It opens up another personality. I always think that when I speak in Spanish, I've got a slightly different personality. When I speak in Polish, a new personality is evolving. There's a lot of things that go, there's a lot to be said for learning a language in terms of what it can mean to you as a person, in terms of who you are and how you're perceived by other people, how you can function in our society, in a globalized society. I know it's going slightly backwards now, but it's still incredibly globalized society. I do think that, we do, of course, it's not the responsibility of only the teacher to do that, but yes, it is got to be part of our message when we're teaching our classes. And I guess that one of the things that we can do is make sure, and this is one of the reasons why it's always nice to go beyond the course book, to make sure that we do bring into the class the sorts of things that students will be interested in. I guess that's where technology can play a really powerful role. This is one of the things with what I'm saying about learning a language today, is that I don't have to open up the course book And sometimes course books are good, so I don't want to diss course books because I like using a course book, but I might open it up and there's a reading passage that I'm not particularly interested in, or a subject that I'm not particularly interested in. The fact that I can go outside of that now, just go onto the internet and say, right, I want to find out about Polish people living around the world, and listen to their interviews about their experiences in living in Colombia and living in Egypt and living in Argentina and living in China, which is one of the things I decided to do. So I thought, right, okay, that'd be brilliant. I'm going to learn Polish, but I'm also going to learn about all these countries. So the fact that you can do things like that, that is incredible. Now, I couldn't do that when I was learning Spanish. I just simply didn't have those sorts of, that sort of content and that variety of content available to me. I had to read the newspaper that I bought, which was something I did enjoy reading. But then, I had to put up with working with a lot of textbooks where perhaps the texts that I read were not that interesting and they didn't necessarily interest me. It's a completely different world now. I mean, I can even get ChatGPT to do the job, okay, which I'm doing all the time. So I'll go on and say to ChatGPT, right, write me the history of Poland between the years 1945 and 1989. Yeah, just write me a short history, or whatever. And it will do it in Polish for me. And then I can learn Polish and at the same time learn about the history of Poland between the period, after the Second World War. This is the sort of thing that I really like. Or even, I'm going to go and visit a certain town. Right, ChatGPT, tell me about Krakow. What would be interesting to visit when I'm there? Can you write it in Polish to a B1 student? And bang, I get this text written for me telling me about what to do when I go to Krakow in Polish. This is amazing. This is, this really opens up a new world to me.
So we need to speak about ChatGPT, right?
ChatGPT, yeah. Took me ages to get that as well, Donna.
Yeah, I'm blocked. And you know very well why I'm blocked, because there's just so many implications about using artificial intelligence. And it's not just the teacher, but as you say, you yourself as a student are using it. I just do want to make one comment. Was it 20 years ago you were working in Seville?
A bit longer than that now, about 24 years ago, 25 years ago.
Okay, we'll say 24 years. But the difference is that you were reading newspapers, and there's a whole sensory experience reading a newspaper. It's the touch and it's the smell and it's listening to the pages turning. And that's something that's being lost with technology. And we need to be very aware of that. But I think that we do need to delve in just briefly, because this is a subject I really need to understand more about, this new technology. And as you say, it's not just the teacher becoming redundant perhaps in the future, but it's the students. It's actually finding a way for them not to use their own minds. It's letting technology form whole thoughts for them. So would you like, by the way, we do want to mention that you have 2 incredibly fascinating videos on this, but tell us what your opinion is, please.
Right. I think I do agree with just some of your comments to a degree. I'm very concerned about ChatGPT. I mean, there are many of these tools around. It's not just ChatGPT. There are already many of these kind of sort of language tools around, tools that will generate text for us. So let's start with, first of all, I don't think it's going to make the teacher redundant. I definitely didn't say that. I know that you might be feeling that.
I said that. Yeah. It's clear.
I think that it could massively change our role. It could do. I think all these things are having there's definitely been a move away from the teacher being the source of knowledge to the teacher being the facilitator, and it's a very, very challenging shift. It's not an easy one to deal with, but certainly that shift is now going on even further. It's just simply, the knowledge is out there, the information out there. So our job changes now to helping students kind of traverse that territory and make use of what's available to them. So teachers becoming more and more facilitators rather than the only source of knowledge. Yeah, I think that's a big part of what's happening. I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to make teachers redundant. One of the things, this might be a small digression, but I think it's worth thinking about. What we understanding about the impact of technology in the world so far is, though it does obviously end up replacing certain jobs, it also creates thousands of other jobs. We call this the long tail. I don't know if you understand that expression, but for example, if you was to talk about 40 years ago and you had, let's give an example, a yoga retreat in Crete. Okay. Now that yoga retreat 40 years ago would have been really hard to set up as a business, because you would have had to advertise in specific magazines. That would have cost a lot of money, and therefore getting your message out. Listen, we've got a yoga retreat in Crete. Though, there probably was a market, you simply couldn't find your customers. And so what the internet generated in that time was the opportunity for lots of long tail, that is businesses that would have never worked before the internet, that suddenly could work. And that's one of the reasons why this impact of technology so far has not led to a reduction in the number of jobs. In fact, there are more people working in Europe now than ever before. I'm not saying they're well-paid jobs, by the way, but I'm just saying that they do generate jobs. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about this idea that technology makes people redundant. I'm not sure it does. I think it also opens up millions of opportunities. Now, we could say the same at the moment was happening with technology. Okay, we've got now a lot more teaching taking place online, but we've also got many more courses now than we had, say, even 20, 30 years ago. Okay, so there are hundreds and hundreds of new courses that are being delivered or online that students have now got access to, and people can do because they're done online. They don't have to fly out to the country. They don't have to go to that specific place. They can study online. So it does actually open up a lot of opportunities. Obviously, we can talk about the quality of those courses, etc. So it's very difficult to say whether or not technology is going to make teachers redundant. It may give them different jobs, different types of jobs, become online tutors, etc., etc. Where there is a danger, Donna, where I do totally agree with you, is in this area of, impacting on the way students think, or even just making certain, and I really agree. So I was the other day in a fairly high-powered conference with some really knowledgeable people on AI who know way more than I do. And this was coming up in the discussion, So, okay, you discourage the students from cheating. You don't want them to write the essay, you get ChatGPT to write the essay, but maybe you get ChatGPT to organize the plan for the essay that you're going to write. But however, even that is not a very good thing, because the reality is, if students stop planning and organizing how they want to put their arguments in a coherent fashion, that is a skill they're going to lose. So I think we've got to be really careful, because people are looking at ChatGPT, okay, right, it's not going to write my essay for me, but it's going to do other things. But those other things are also processes, cognitive processes, that we don't really want to take out of the hands of the students and pass over to ChatGPT, including brainstorming. I mean, it's really great that you can go on ChatGPT and say, suggest 15 ideas around my next YouTube video, on the area of technology, and it will give me 15 suggestions. But then that's taking a lot of processing away from me in terms of me thinking about, what's going on in the market and what the opportunities are. It's other people arguing, we were saying, Russell, no, that's it. It's taking away the donkey work. You can get on with the creative stuff. It's a difficult one. I don't know the answer. I've been listening on people's discussions to try to help to formulate my own ideas about it, and I haven't got them clear. All I know is that the way that I've been using ChatGPT for me in my own language learning has been a revelation. It has really opened up, a whole new avenue to me that wasn't available to me before, and I'm really enjoying it. But I'm very much aware that overall, there are a lot of concerns.
So I really appreciate all of these comments. And of course, I don't think that you have the answer. There's not just one answer. There are many answers. For me, what you've done is outline all the reasons why I think it's still dangerous, because all of these things, as you say, are very important for students to learn. Mm. I mean, something as simple as taking cursive out of a curriculum means that different tracks in the brain are not being used. So if you can imagine using this AI program for something like organizing the structure or creating an essay, you are autodidactic. You love learning and you're self-motivated, but that is a very small percentage of the population. And so a lot of students, I was an English literature teacher, and I know back 20 years ago that with the technology, then my students were using the computer to write their essays, and I was so ignorant, I did not realize it. Now with this new say it one more time.
ChatGPT.
Thank you. I would probably not be able to really detect where their thoughts began and the computer ended. And I don't even know if there would be. These students can be very sly. No,
I agree, Donna. I do agree. I agree. And I think if you was sort of just, listening, I've said I've been in maybe 3 conferences so far, and, that's already come up. Issues of students cheating, although in fact, it's actually quite prevalent.
And they do, I mean, they always have in every country in every way. It's just that I think it's easier now, and I think it's to their detriment. As you were saying, one incredibly important point that I always like to hone in on in my workshops is to go into the classroom with a different attitude than I am the source of all knowledge. The teacher does not need to be the source of all knowledge, and no teacher is actually. But with that is that the students need to know how to find information and process that information, not go to a computer and ask the computer to do it for them. So there just is something, there's a jump here. It doesn't make me nervous. It just makes me pause, and it makes me realize that there's just a whole new conversation that needs to be really delved into and considered. We had brilliant students long before any technology. Why do we need all of this? And yet, Russell, I know, I mean, I work for digital online universities, so there is a place for technology, and I so appreciate the technology that you've introduced me to and that you're introducing to other people. I just wonder where the balance is.
Well, as I said, I mean, you know, think about what we're doing today. You just wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago. You know, this is what I'm saying to you. It's so much. It's so. There's always two sides to the coin. So this is the reality of all new technologies that have ever been introduced into our society. You know, it's just simply the way it is. I think sometimes though we don't think enough about just how many new opportunities technology is actually open. I mean, the stats talk for themselves when it comes to jobs. That's certainly the case so far. That doesn't mean to say that it will always be like that, and I really don't know, you know. But and then of course the other thing is you probably are aware really where ChatGPT is having a massive impact is in business. Okay, so that is it's really the application of ChatGPT in business. It's just absolutely incredible what it can do for you. Now, it's already started working for me. There's various things that I do with ChatGPT now, including helping me to think of new ideas for making videos. But, you know, every time I make a video, I have to write a description into that video for YouTube to explain to YouTube what that video is about. You know, that can take me quite a long time. It's quite boring, really, because I'm just doing it so that YouTube is absolutely clear on what the contents of my video is about. Well, I can get ChatGPT to do that. It can save me ages. I can get ChatGPT to think of, you know, labels that I make a new video about Camtasia, and I want to think of all the labels connected to Camtasia that I could add in to help YouTube understand what my video is about. And ChatGPT will generate that for me. You know, so there are really a lot of useful uses of ChatGPT. You know, it can, you know, I mean, in terms of language learning, we were doing an activity the other day around the life of, and I never realized how interesting this person was, Sylvester Stallone. And okay, I never realized that he had an incredible life. And then after doing these activities, and we watched a video with my teacher, and we learned some vocabulary, and we spoke about his life. And you know, I then went on to ChatGPT and said, right now, just write me the history of Sylvester Stallone in Polish, level B2, and highlight the keywords. You know, bang, it wrote it out. And so I was able to carry on that lesson that I'd started in the class with my teacher and do another activity just based around it. Yeah, that the ChatGPT had just produced for me. You know, so can you write me 10 comprehension questions based on the text? Bang, you know, and provide the answers so that I can check it afterwards. Incredible. So there is, you know, it has a really positive side, and it can make your learning so much more interesting. You know, you really, it's like having a kind of encyclopedia that's just got no end. It does get some things wrong. There's still quite a lot of work to be done. It doesn't always get historic information correct, but certainly in terms of language learning, it's very, very interesting, and obviously being used a lot in business.
Okay, so I really appreciate these comments, because there are some things that you've just said that I completely agree with. Others, I think it just proves what a self-learner you are, but it's okay. I usually like ending on a what if question. So this is, you can go off with whatever you want here. My question for you is, what if you were the director of a school? Now, you don't see yourself as an educator in general. I do, but let's just say it's a language school. You were asked to be the director of a school. How would you design it, and what methodologies would you promote, and what technologies would you promote?
So I was a director of a school, and in fact, my school that I was the director of studies of, you know, it became an international house school, and we were accepted. So, you know, what did I do? I mean, I was a very young boy when I did that, and very, very naive, but I did have a couple of really clear things in my mind. The first thing we did when we took over, and my friend Michael, I've mentioned at the beginning of this talk, he also came to the school and worked with me. We were always looking at trying to develop teacher training. So one of the most important things for me is you can't beat a well-trained teacher. As I said at the beginning, whether or not you bring technology into you can't beat a well-trained teacher. And a well-trained teacher can make a lesson interesting with or without technology, just like my Polish teacher that I had nearly 4 years ago now in Krakow for 2 weeks. He was just like a magician. So, when I went into my school, I did that. I really, and then I guess I just thought about the whole culture of the way that the school was going to work in terms of the way it was going to look. We made sure that there was loads of language about English in the classroom, lots of, hints about encouraging students to speak English by having useful classroom language in the lesson all on the wall so that the students could ask the questions in English. And we just, we created a video library so students could take home videos. So I tried to create an environment about language learning. Yeah, so we had a library so students could take out books and read those books at home. We had a video library so they could take home. We set up an exchange system between those people, who English speakers, because there were lots of English speakers in the school who spoke Spanish, who were studying their Spanish, and obviously my students who were coming in to learn English. So we got them to kind of do language exchanges. That wasn't my idea. I have to say that was already something that was in the school before I came in. But all those sorts of things that really create a school where there's a whole kind of, it's like a kind of like a mini English world, an opportunity to go into that school, well qualified teachers, access to books, access to videos, access to opportunities for an intercambio. We then created like a very early multimedia room where students could go and study on the internet and stuff like that. So I would probably go about things in the same way. I would, as a kind of philosophy, I would put heavy emphasis on training our students to be able to make better use of technology outside of the class. So one of the things that I would say to you, sometimes when I introduce a technology into the class, let's say I do introduce them to doing Quizlet, for example, let's say, the reason that I might be doing that is not so much about the lesson, but it's about planting a seed that they might think, well, actually then, great, we've done this Quizlet game today in lesson. I could do that on my own. I felt the same about reading. I always was very interested in getting my students to read. We always use readers in our classes, yeah? So we would choose a book, we would all buy it, we would read it, we would do it like a chapter at a time, and then we would have discussions in the classroom about the book. I'd always link it back to the class. Why was I doing that? Well, the activities were interested in themselves, but really what I was doing was trying to generate an interest in reading that students might think to themselves, well, actually, I could go off and buy another reader now and read on my own. I don't only have to do this in the classroom. So one of the things I would try to do, I guess if I had a school now, is, and I was doing it before, but I'd say I'd even do it to a greater degree now, is be looking at the technologies and the opportunities, planting seeds that would allow our students to go off and become more effective learners on their own and more autonomous, more independent. I guess that's one of the things that I would try to do.
And your 3 favorite technologies right today? You can change your mind tomorrow.
Well, ChatGPT at this moment in time, I have to say, because I'm using it so much, I am, though we've talked about all the problems, but I find it really, really useful. Absolutely YouTube. Learning to use YouTube well, making use of the transcripts, learning to search for videos. I use YouTube every single day of my life. Many, many, many times. I'll be walking around the house listening to YouTube videos, not just for language learning as well, for other things that I'm interested in. So I would definitely say those 2. I guess another one, that I use quite a lot really would be Google Translate. I know it's a really simple tool, but I use Google Translate a lot. And then I use it as a way of keeping a record of all the new phrases I'm learning. And I like the fact that you can play the audio. I can have a big list of words in Polish that I'm currently wanting to study, and I can click and listen to them. So Google Translate would be such a simple tool, but so useful to me.
Okay, and you were saying that YouTube, people don't realize that there are a lot of different settings that you can change. And one simple one that I never really knew about was changing the speed of the video. And I used that in one workshop, and it was the most commented technology or setting that I've ever received. You can just either speed up or slow down the narration, which is huge. So I'd love people to go into your website, and we're going to make sure that we have the link there so people can find you. What else would you want people to know about you? You give workshops, you have free videos, so many, hundreds of free videos. And what else would you like people to know about you?
Well, sign up to the newsletter, because there's no trick. I generate my income in a completely different way. So I make videos that show teachers how to use technology. I get lots of information from other teachers about what technologies are around. So yeah, they're pretty up to date. I'm not super up to date because I wait for teachers to kind of experience using technologies and suggest them to me, or I'm looking for them. But the newsletter will keep you informed about all the latest technologies. I only ever normally suggest one thing a week. I don't throw loads and loads of lists of technologies at you. So you'll get that. And at the moment, if you sign up as well, we've kind of got this automated system. So what happens is you sign up to the newsletter and you'll get like bit by bit, I think I send you like a video automatically every 4 or 5 days, a kind of mini 14-part course about using technology in teaching and learning. And that will kind of bring you up to date. And the good thing again is it's only one video each time. So it's not as if you've got to sit down and spend hours and hours. It's really just a little thing to kind of get you going. So sign up to the newsletter, because I don't suddenly turn around and say, I want $50 off you or something like that. No, it's just completely free. All the material's free, and it will kind of keep you at least sort of up to date with what's going on.
And it just shows what an incredibly generous person you are, an incredible educator, and really just wanting people to use technology responsibly and in an informed manner. So Russell, I cannot thank you enough for giving us this time and for informing us. And I hope that you come back and we talk about more specific things in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you.
So that's our conversation with Russell Stannard, an incredibly generous and dedicated educator who helps us to ease into whatever technological adventures we might be beginning. Please be sure to check out his site at teachertrainingvideos.com, and you can find activities that will augment his videos at my site, scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classrooms and at home, and see you soon!